Settle in. Let your body find a comfortable position. The world around you can fade for a while. We are going to step back, far back, into the winding streets and quiet parlors of Victorian Britain. The age is remembered in photographs where women stand still in long dresses. Faces serious, framed by lace curtains or polished wooden furniture. It was a time of great invention, of railways and factories, of novels by Dickens and Brontë, of grand houses and polite society. But beneath the surface, life was not the romantic scene we sometimes imagine, especially for a wife. In this journey, you will walk with me through the everyday existence of a Victorian wife. We will not rush. We will linger in the details, the rooms, the chores, the rules that shaped her hours. We will notice the quiet struggles and the silent resilience, all in the measured rhythm of life more than a century ago. So imagine yourself waking up in another time. The air cooler, the light softer, filtered through thin lace, the day about to begin. The Victorian home stirred to life early. Before the city or village streets were properly awake, the household's day began especially for a wife. She might open her eyes to a dim gray light, filtered through a frost-patterned window pane in winter, or a pale golden wash in summer. There was no electric glow, only the slow unveiling of daylight. The air in the bedroom was often cold, because fires were expensive to keep burning all night. If she was fortunate, a maid might bring in hot water for washing. If not, she would rise herself, moving quietly so as not to wake the children, and begin heating water over the range. Washing meant a simple porcelain bowl, a bar of coarse soap, and cold splashes that stung the skin. The scent was faintly metallic, the water drawn from a pump or carried in from a backyard well. This was not a time of long, luxurious baths. Cleanliness was a constant effort, and one more task to fold into a crowded day. Dressing was a ritual of layers. Chemise, corset, petticoats, perhaps a bustle, each piece fastened and smoothed before the next. The fabrics were stiff with starch or heavy with wool, and moving in them was an exercise in patience. Corsets pulled the waist tight, restricting deep breaths, yet expected to be worn without complaint. Breakfast, too, was her responsibility, even if servants prepared it. The Victorian wife was the unseen manager of the home, expected to oversee every detail. The menu, the quality of the tea leaves, the way the table was set. If she had no staff, her own hands prepared the bread, the porridge, or the boiled eggs, while keeping an ear out for the children stirring upstairs. Meals were not just food, they were social markers. Bread to coarse, butter to hard, tea to weak, these could be taken as signs of carelessness. So each morning began with a small test of her competence as mistress of the house. Once breakfast was cleared, the day unfurled into a series of duties. For wives of the middle class, this meant the endless administration of domestic life. Inspecting the laundry, checking on cold deliveries, writing lists for the grocer, planning dinner in accordance with both the budget and the season. For wives in working-class homes, it meant labor that blurred the line between survival and exhaustion. Scrubbing floors until the boards were pale, carrying water up narrow stairs, mending clothes until her fingers ached. The scent of soap, damp wool, and coal smoke clung to her clothes. Even leisure was not entirely her own. Needlework, letter writing, or reading were all done with an eye to duty-making clothes. Maintaining social ties, improving her mind in ways considered suitable. Outside the home, her world was often narrow. A trip to the market or the butcher shop was as much social exchange as necessity. And the street brought its own quiet rules, glances to avoid, voices to keep low, manners to maintain. In many homes, especially in the industrial towns, the soundscape was constant. The distant hum of factories, the clip of boots on cobblestones, the rattle of carts over uneven roads. Inside, the ticking of a clock might seem the loudest sound, marking the steady, measured hours of a life devoted to the rhythm of others. Evening brought more work, lighting lamps, serving dinner, tidying rooms, preparing clothing for the next day. By the time the house was quiet, her own rest was often brief. And yet the next day would follow the same pattern, unbroken, demanding. It was a life shaped by constancy and constraint. Not a single moment was entirely hers. Every hour belonged to the upkeep of the home, the care of her family, and the unspoken rules of a society that watched silently for any sign of neglect. Imagine the London of the 1850s, its soot-darkened buildings, horse-drawn omnibuses clattering over wet cobblestones, the mingling sense of coal smoke and bakery bread drifting along narrow streets. It was into this world that Isabella Mary Beeton stepped, carrying the responsibilities of both a wife and a homemaker in a society where a woman's competence was often measured by the smooth running of her household. Isabella is remembered today as Mrs. Beeton, the author of the Book of Household Management. It's a title that sounds neat, tidy, even comforting, but behind it lay a life of steady effort and quiet struggle, with little room for rest. She was born in 1836, the eldest of 21 children in a blended family. From an early age, she learned the skills of organization not as a hobby, but as a necessity. Her childhood was filled with small acts of responsibility, helping younger siblings, managing household tasks, learning the genteel arts expected of a respectable young woman. When she married Samuel Beeton at the age of 20, her life did not suddenly open into freedom. Instead, her role became even more defined. As a wife in the mid-Victorian period, she was expected to manage her home with precision, to keep it both orderly and welcoming, and to embody the moral values of the age. It was a quiet but constant form of performance. Everything from the folding of linens to the timing of meals was a reflection of her skill. Her husband was a publisher, and Isabella began contributing to his magazines, offering recipes, tips for housekeeping, and advice for wives. But her writing was not done in an office. Away from domestic demands, it was fitted between cooking, cleaning, managing servants, and caring for her children. Each piece of advice she wrote was grounded in the reality she lived every day, that a wife must be part administrator, part caregiver, part moral guide. Her famous book, published in 1861, contained over 1,000 pages. It covered not only recipes, but also cleaning schedules, child-rearing guidance, and instructions for managing servants. It was meant to be practical and comprehensive, a handbook for wives navigating the same challenges she faced. Yet the sheer size of the book hints at something else, that the expectations placed upon a Victorian wife were vast, stretching into every corner of her life. But Isabella's own life was not insulated from hardship. Childbearing in the Victorian era was dangerous, and she experienced its risks firsthand. She gave birth to 4 children, but only to survive infancy. Illness was a constant shadow, and medicine of the time offered little certainty. In 1865, at just 28 years old, Isabella died of complications following childbirth, her life cut short at an age when, by today's standards, she would have been only beginning. Her story is often told as one of domestic authority, a woman who shaped the standards of her time. But behind that image was a life bound tightly by the expectations of marriage, expectations that demanded endurance, precision, and sacrifice in equal measure. When you picture her, perhaps imagine her in a quiet morning scene, sitting at a small writing desk, a cup of cooling tea beside her, pen in hand, pausing to listen for the stir of a child upstairs, the clink of dishes from the kitchen, or the distant toll of a church bell marking the next hour in a day already full. The peculiar beliefs surrounding the Victorian wife and the Victorian imagination. Marriage was not merely a personal union, it was a moral and almost mystical institution. A wife's role was believed to be not just practical, but symbolic, an anchor for the moral order of the home. And around this belief grew a web of customs, quiet rules, and sometimes superstitions that seem curious now. One such custom was the language of mourning. Death was an ever-present part of life in the 19th century, and the loss of a husband or family member triggered an elaborate set of rituals, especially for wives. Widowhood could mean wearing black crepe clothing for up to 2 years, avoiding bright colors entirely, and refraining from public gatherings that might suggest joy. The idea was that a wife's grief was not only personal, it was a public statement, a moral demonstration of loyalty and propriety. Then there were the rules of correspondence. Victorian wives, particularly those in the middle and upper classes, were expected to maintain a network of letters carefully handwritten, always polite, and never rushed. A simple thank you note might be crafted with a level of formality that today would be reserved for a legal document. Even the type of paper, the color of the ink, and the neatness of the handwriting reflected on the wife's character. Some customs bordered on the superstitious. It was thought unlucky. For example, for a newlywed wife to sew on the day before her wedding, it could stitch bad fortune into the marriage. In some rural areas, women would quietly place a sprig of rosemary or lavender in the folds of their wedding gown, believing the scent would protect them from future sorrow. Household management itself was guided by unwritten rules that could feel almost ceremonial. The laying of the dining table was an art. Knives and forks positioned just so. Flowers arranged at an exact height so as not to block conversation. The linen smooth and spotless. Small deviations could be remarked upon subtly by guests' tiny signals that might whisper of either diligence or neglect. In the more curious corners of Victorian culture, the wife was sometimes seen as the spiritual guardian of the home. Magazines of the time encouraged her to read aloud moral tales to her children in the evenings, to lead gentle hymns at the piano, and to ensure that Sundays were observed with quiet devotion. Even the decoration of a room could be seen as part of this moral role-placing religious texts where they might be noticed, arranging portraits of family in order of seniority, keeping the parlor ready to receive guests at a moment's notice. For poorer wives, these customs were less about grandeur and more about preserving dignity. Even in cramped lodgings with peeling wallpaper and smoky air, small touches, a polished teapot, a carefully mended tablecloth were believed to keep misfortune at bay. Superstitions about sweeping dirt out of the house after sunset, or never leaving laundry on the line overnight, were observed quietly, passed from mother to daughter without ever being written down. One particularly enduring belief was that a wife's tone of voice could set the moral temperature of a household. Soft-spoken patience was praised, while raised voices were seen as a crack in the foundation of domestic harmony. It was an ideal that could be exhausting to uphold, especially in homes where daily life was far from harmonious. In all of these customs, there is a quiet weight. The sense that a Victorian wife was both the keeper of daily order and the silent bearer of unseen rules. Many of them rooted in tradition, superstition, and social expectation. Whether she believed them or not, they wove themselves into the rhythm of her life, guiding her steps in ways she might never openly question.